Hey guys, welcome in for tonight's Truth Talks. I am so glad you guys decided to join me. Give you a couple minutes for everybody to start logging in. We're going to have an interesting conversation this evening, albeit brief but powerful, on a subject that is oftentimes misunderstood, abused, and taken for granted oftentimes. So, and that subject is the subject of submission and what that looks like in relationships, how you navigate in that space, all the way around wholeheartedly. So, as you guys come in, feel free to share the video out, invite some other folks into the conversation. If you're catching it on a replay, thank you for making that investment. If you're catching it on one of my other platforms, such as YouTube or LinkedIn, welcome as well. For those of you who may not know me, Truth Talks is honest conversations, reality-based conversations, real talk about real stuff for real people, things that we really go through in life, but nobody gives us a handbook on it, nobody provides a manual on it, and submission is huge in relationships with other people, and not just intimate relationships. People submit on different levels, and so we're going to talk about submission this evening and what submission is, the cost of submission versus control, and how that exhibits itself or manifests itself in your life, relationships, and business. So as you guys come in, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcy Batiste. I am your ultimate power coach, America's #1 reality-based success and recovery trainer, helping professionals, career professionals just like you, who are ready to bring some harmony back into your life, your relationships, your businesses, and truly begin to enrich that personal foundation so that you can empower your professional position. And a subject matter like submission is huge. It's huge because on all levels, whether it's life, relationship, or business, we'll find ourselves in places of various degrees of positioning, right? And so when you think of employment, for instance, you've got superiors, bosses, supervisors, managers, executives, so forth. So there's all these layers, and you've got employees and other subordinates. You got people who maybe are just working around the company but don't work for the company, vendors, and so forth. And so all of them have a different relationship with the organization when we're looking at businesses. Same thing happens when we're talking about personal relationships, intimate relationships, particularly as it comes into intimate relationships. I think the term submission is very misunderstood. And I'm not speaking of like sexual submission. I'm speaking on an emotional level of submission. It's not about obedience, it's not about control. And I think a lot of times when people hear the word submission, they're immediately like, you're not going to tell me what to do. And submission is exactly the opposite of that. It's completely the opposite of that. But so many times people don't understand the term, and nor do they understand what it looks like in action. And so then in submission, someone who has chosen to be submissive is oftentimes misunderstood, taken for granted, and people just don't really know how to interact with them. I can speak to that from personal experience, because that's how I tend to operate in relationships. I tend to choose to be submissive. And so I'm going to talk through kind of what does that look like? How do you know the difference between submission and control? What is the difference actually? Because a lot of people just don't even know what the difference is. And so they confuse the terms. And so there's a few things that differentiate submission from control. The first thing is, the most important thing is, submission is always voluntary. It's always voluntary. You can't force someone into submission, because then it becomes control. Control, on the other hand, then is mandatory. It's something that's required. Submission's not required to have a healthy relationship. nor is control necessarily, right? But understanding that there is a very fine, definitive line between submission, which is me voluntarily following and allowing someone to lead, versus someone demanding that I follow and allow them to lead. So, what does submission look like? What does what does a healthy submission look like in personal and intimate relationships? I had this conversation earlier with one of my good friends, and we were talking about the breakdown of relationships. She does coaching for individuals who are second time singles. So they've been in the whole relationship thing, done the whole thing, didn't quite work out the way they had planned, and now they are second time. Let's figure this whole single game out. What's it look like to navigate in this space, and so on. So we're having this conversation about relationships and breakups and breakdowns in relationships, and I was sharing with her that my experience was that I am by choice submissive in personal relationships, intimate relationships. Not necessarily in family relationships or friendships, but definitely in intimate relationships, people that I'm dating, my marriage, etc., and so on. And so we were talking about how that is such a responsibility. Hey, Gregory, that is such a responsibility. And, I didn't even think about the degree of responsibility that is, because it's my nature to be that way. But I have to understand that because it's my nature to be that way, I can't be that way with everybody, because everybody's not prepared or equipped to be that leader that you need in place in order to be successfully submissive in a relationship. And so in particular, we're talking about how that looked for me, what my personal experience was. And I was talking about one of my relationships, and I said, he misunderstood me being submissive and took that for granted, to think that he could walk all over me, that I'm like this piece of cake or whatever, or that he really kind of ran the show, this, that, and the other thing. That wasn't the case at all. I chose to be submissive. I chose to let him lead. But what I didn't do, and this was all on me, I didn't pay attention to the signs that said, Mars, he ain't ready. He ain't ready for that kind of leadership. He's not ready for that. He doesn't have the tools he needs to lead in a way that's going to allow you to be successfully submissive. And so, when you think about like old school, right? And you think about, they used to say that women were submissive all the time, like old school relationships, married 60, 70 years, woman was submissive. More oftentimes than not, she was controlled. She wasn't necessarily voluntarily submissive. Society forced her to submit in certain ways and in certain areas. And so that's why you saw some of the results that you saw. You saw a lot of abuse that went unspoken and unreported. You saw a lot of infidelities. You saw a lot of emotional and particularly financial abuse was huge, because they made it mandatory. So therefore, it was no longer submission. It was simply control. And when somebody stops wanting to be controlled, then there's a power struggle that is bound to happen. It's a natural force, because you're not on the same page anymore. So you have the old school version, which looks more like control, and then you have a new school version, which is based 100% on trust. And so there's certain qualities that I was thinking about, like, if somebody is going to have the leadership, if they're going to have what they need for me, let's say, to be successfully submissive, because that's like I said, that's my nature. That's how I want to operate. That's my desire to operate that way in a personal, intimate relationship. So I didn't always pick partners who were ready to lead. And so the first foundation of how did you measure his readiness? That's just it, Gregory. Great question. I didn't measure his readiness because I didn't know then what I know now about my own self and my own what it meant to be submissive. I didn't recognize in me what that was going to look like as it as it manifested itself in the relationship. I didn't understand it. And so that's why I thought, this is a really important topic to talk about, because had I known over the course of the years about my tendency to be submissive and what that looks like, I could have measured their readiness better. I could have noticed the red flags and knew then I need to not change who I am, but I need to operate differently. I can't just give all and go all in a submissive way if they're not prepared and have the tools that they need to be that leadership. And so the first thing, foundationally, I think, is it's got to be built on trust. You have to be able to trust that the person you choose to submit to has the desire and the capacity to lead you and care for you in a way that will protect you financially, will protect you emotionally, will protect you spiritually, in all ways. And there might be some areas that they're stronger in than others, and that's okay. I'm not saying you can't submit unless everything is perfect, but I'm saying that's an awareness factor. That if you go into a relationship knowing that you have a submissive nature and you want to be successfully submissive, then you have to know these things about yourself and be able to recognize that in your partner. And then you alter your level of submission based on their readiness, their preparedness. How strong are they in these categories? But the thing of it is trusting that they have the desire to lead you and they have the capacity. Because there's a whole lot of people that want to be in charge of stuff and they don't have the capacity to run the show. And it's not about, again, it's not about control. It's not about who shines, who's up front, who's in charge. This is everything that goes on behind closed doors. This is behind the scenes. This is, yes, how I behave in public. It is in part reflected based on my level of submission in the relationship, but not totally, because that submission carries on. So, for instance, things like bringing him a plate, or in the case that there's a guy who is more naturally submissive, fixing her food, running her a bath. There are certain things that we do that allow us to show that we care for someone. And it's oftentimes not the big stuff, and it's oftentimes not the things that people see out in the streets. It's the stuff that goes on behind closed doors that allows you to become successfully submissive. And I keep saying successfully submissive because I was very submissive, but I wasn't successful because I didn't understand at that time what all needed to go into that relationship, how I needed him to be able to operate in order for me to be successfully submissive. And so I was submissive and he took it for granted. Almost in every instance that was the case. And so if that's the case in every instance, I'm the common denominator. It can't always be them. So I had to look at myself and say, okay, what are you doing wrong? How are you navigating in these relationships that teach people how to treat you? Because we teach people how to be in relation with us. And so if we are submissive by nature and we want to teach someone how to be in relation with us in that way, there are certain things that we have to help them along in the process. And it becomes it's a dance, you are going to have missteps. You are going to step on their toes sometimes. It's not going to exactly be perfect every time. But if you have that foundation of trust, they have the desire and the capacity to be able to lead you in a way that allows you to feel loved, respected, and cared for. That is a great, great place to start. Isn't there a difference between meeting your needs and being submissive? Absolutely, there's a difference in that. Being submissive is one of the things that I had on there. The quality is the desire, and it's the desire to just care for someone else, and the desire to allow the desire to want to meet their needs. And so, yeah, the two go somewhat hand in hand, but without the desire there, then meeting the needs doesn't fall into the line of submissive. submissive, because you can be controlling and force someone to meet your needs, but it doesn't make them submissive. It makes you controlling. It makes them forced into a situation, but that's not their desire. So right behind trust then becomes desire. And then from the leadership aspect, I look at it from like I said, it's not about what they see in the streets. It's not always about what you see in the streets. But to that point, it's okay to show there's a certain level of respect that comes with that. And that comes from the leadership. That comes from the desire for us to be in this successfully. So there's a term, old school term, let a man be the man, right? You can very much do that, and you can very much show that submissive side to you out in public, in the streets per se, in front of their friends per se. It's up to that individual to not abuse that. And that's where the leadership comes in. Like they have to walk the talk at all times. And that leadership comes with a level of respect, where just because I choose to be submissive to you in front of your friends doesn't give you the right to talk to me crazy. It doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful, because that's not leadership. It's not a quality of leadership to be disrespectful. And so all of that stuff goes into this. That's why it's so huge, but we never have the conversation about what it means to be successfully submissive. I was thinking some of the other things are that, successful submission is about choices. Like you have the right to choose. This is what I want to do for you. This is how I want to care for you. This is how I want to meet your needs. If I know that there's a certain dessert that you like, or just again, the desire to make someone else happy, the desire to meet their needs, but it has to be a choice. If you take away my choice, I'm no longer submitting, I'm forced. Two totally different things. But what's but what's but they're two totally different things. I think for someone to operate in a successfully submissive relationship, there has to be this mutual kind of partnership mentality. Like that's what I think it is. It's a partnership mentality. Like we're in this together. We have the same goals. We share the same vision. But if he doesn't have the leadership, how are you gonna share the vision? And if you can't understand vision, how can I share mine? And how can you support that? Because as my leader, as someone I'm submitting to, as someone I have given you the trust to have the desire and the capacity to care for me and to protect me, then I can still have my own vision. I still have my own life. I still have my own dreams. I still have my own desires. I still have my own whole everything. Being successfully submissive doesn't take that away. It should enhance it for both partners. And like I said, it doesn't matter if, I'm speaking from the woman being submissive to the man, but it can certainly go either way. There are many, many men who desire to be more submissive. And I can tell you where mine came from. Mine came from being a corporate executive. I always had to be on point. I always had to be on my game. I always had to be in charge. I always had to make decisions. So for me, in my personal, intimate relationship, I want someone who can release that burden. I don't want to be that person at home. I don't want to, I'm comfortable in the boardroom. I'm comfortable on the stage giving an address in front of hundreds of people. But when I come home at night and I'm with my significant other, I want to be able to take all that off and leave it at the door and just be able to be supportive and be caring and nurturing and show that softer side. But if you've got someone who's not equipped to receive that, it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for misery, because they're not going to be able to handle that. And then at some point you begin to feel as though you're being taken for granted. You'll oftentimes find yourself feeling disrespected in public. They'll oftentimes take on this persona of being your keeper more than your partner. And to me, that's not acceptable. Because like I said, the hugest part of this is that trust and the leadership piece. And if you are being that way, I can't trust you, and you're not being a leader, and therefore this doesn't work. And so I have to then adjust my own tendencies in order to protect where I'm going. You should never, by being submissive, you should never feel like you don't have an opinion, or that you're not of value, or that you're not contributing to the relationship. Submission does not require that. Successful submission does not require that. Control, demanding, mandatory stipulations, that, yeah, but that's not successful submission. And that's why it's important for us to get really, really crystal clear on the difference, because so many people are out there saying, oh yeah, I want a submissive woman, but you're not ready to have one. You wouldn't know what to do with her if you had it. And that's real talk. That's real talk from personal experience. And not to say that they're any of them are bad dudes. Very, very good dudes, but they're still not equipped to handle that because nobody's had that conversation with them, and there's not that level of understanding. And so it goes back to that partnership mentality. Are we in this together? Do we share the same vision? Do we share the same dreams? Are our passions? Are you going to ride for me? Can I trust you to ride for? Are you going to ride for me? You can trust me to ride for you. I got your back. You got my back. You know, all the things we say we want. But are we prepared to do what we need to do in order to receive that blessing and be the leader that we need to be? Even as being successfully submissive, you still have to have your own leadership. You still have to have that. It doesn't go away because you're being submissive. You still have your whole life. You still have your own vision. You still have your own goals, your own dreams, whole 9 yards. But you're in it together. That's the beauty of being in a relationship where you can be, if that's your desire, to be submissive. And for me personally, that hasn't changed. As a corporate executive, I was that way. As an entrepreneur, I'm that way. If I constantly have to be making decisions, I want to know that I can trust my partner has the desire and the capacity, the level of mental and emotional intelligence to do what it takes to handle things. And let me just care for you. Let me just, let me take care of you. Let me put your feet up. You take a load off. And then every now and again to get that back, such a blessing. But that's how it should be. It should be reciprocated. You're not always the one giving, and you're not always the one pouring out. You get back in a successfully submissive relationship. You get back tremendously in many ways from your partner. But it requires that you both have a healthy understanding of what that's going to look like, how you're going to function, how you're going to operate, and how you're going to manage the relationship. So that's my conversation tonight. The price of submission and the difference between submission and control. And it all boils down to the trust factor and the leadership factor, I think, are the biggest components in remembering that submission is always a choice. It's never mandatory. All right, guys, that's it for me tonight. Thanks, as always, for being part of the Ultimate Power Team, living life on Mars with me, doing what it do. I will check in with y'all later on tonight for Fat Chat. All right, have a good one, guys.